come in, and welcome back. This is kind of our second session back. So I know it'll probably take a few folks a little bit of time to get back into the schedule of switching between the governance and the profiling streams on InfoCentral, but those call details should all be refreshed on the InfoCentral calendar. So if you're having any trouble, just let us know, but I had a check of it earlier in the week and everything looked kosher. So just as a general housekeeping note, I'm just going to put the YouTube link in the chat. So kind of our re-kickoff, I suppose, is what we called it last week, of the kind of governance and kind of profiling combined topics has been loaded to the playlist as of last week. And I've been carrying over, we spent a good deal of time in last session talking about what the topics that we were looking forward to in terms of the respective series for governance and profiling in the near term. So I've got those pulled into the Slack, into the slides for later today. I pulled up the ones that we had talked about last week covering today, and then I've also added one, I think that's an important kind of governance decisioning piece. So we are going to try to return to our conventional cadence of this is a week of governance. Next week will be a week of profiling, where we'll start digging into specific items on the issue log and discuss what needs to change and how to address specific community requests related to the FHIR profiles. So I think we've got a little bit of a cumulative mass. If you weren't part of our call-in last Friday, just a huge thank you. If you've been joining us anytime in the last 4 months, we completed our community review of the CA Core V01 subset back in, I want to say it was the very beginning of March, and have spent a considerable amount of time providing feedback, reacting, and helping in its refinement. So a huge thank you to everyone involved for offering up our time in the CA baseline to look at these content together and to improve it as an aspect of interacting with it. Those sessions, at least the community review sessions, are also on the playlist, and then on InfoCentral, if you're interested in the disposition sessions, you can find those in the forums as well. I've highlighted in the agenda slide a couple topics for today. So I added one to the top that we didn't know of kind of last week, or we had some inklings of, but hadn't started to discuss. And that's around access to kind of our historical content and what we should do kind of moving forward. There is a topic around our canonical URL that we've been discussing for quite a bit that we said we would reconvene on following the kind of the January through March review. And then also discussions kind of in that same vein around our project URL. I think both of them have to do with when is the right time to change, if we're going to change, and how do we communicate outwards and the impacts to potential community members. So very much kind of feels like a governance heavy with some profiling insight thrown in there too. And then we started to talk a little bit about this last topic last time, which is how do we address potential changes. So I think we have some changes that we know will need discussion that we heard last time. We'll port over into the profiling calls next Friday. But that there's a more process related question that remains around how do we want to as a community scan for things that could potentially impact the baseline in the future, so we can be kind of agile and responsive to those. There's one I'm not that aggressive in thinking we'll be able to get to all of these today, but the other one that we've kind of raised in the past is stub value set approach. We've had a couple of requests come through on folks who are utilizing CA baseline content for the practitioner and the practitioner role that want to see a little bit more consistency in the our utilization of stub value sets around a topic that I think we've kind of discussed quite a bit in the past. So kind of our pick list for today. Was there other things from a governance standpoint that folks wanted to make sure that is very, very pressing, that we want to make sure makes its way on the agenda today, or that we can, if you didn't add it last week, that we can add into that kind of future topics list? All right. So let me just make sure I've got the recording going. Perfect. Okay. So the first one. So we have, like, similar to how we kind of have a housekeeping item where we have said, okay, here's how you find the recordings of our sessions. And that's been going on for, I don't know, someone keep me honest, but I want to say we've been probably recording for a good 16 months. We used to load the slide decks for every one of our Friday calls and load them into our own cloud. And then when we had the recording, we heard, okay, folks are probably more likely to look at the recording than they are to like look for the decks, but we were still utilizing it for historical kind of purposes, as well as when we have special topic presentations where, you know, maybe we have the recording, but folks also want access to the materials. Like we had a bake presentation from the folks at FHIR. Joni had some slides that she presented a while back on one of the topics around HL7 modeling for patient contact information. We've been using our own cloud to like have a place for that to live. Over the last couple of weeks, we had trouble getting back into, we had like a link for loading and a link for access to the public materials. And we were really kind of struggling with that. And we were working with the InfoWay team, the IT team, to figure out like, okay, you know, like how do we get back in, and like where did it go? And this might seem familiar to so many of you folks who have to do who do cloud document hosting. It certainly happened to me in the past where if you use a tool for essentially short-term sharing, there are automatic refreshes that are built in and that require manual effort to then kind of pull back any of the files after a refresh occurs. So that happened. It happened with our own files. They were able to go in, find them, restore them, put them on a new link, but pointed out, I think justly, that in the same vein, it's a kind of temporary measure that is supposed to support like handover of materials, but like may not be the most reliable option moving forward for like perpetuity, or moving forward in perpetuity, given that, like, you know, persistence requires some consistency, and like having gone through this process before on my own with having to retrieve these files, it's not a pretty thing to have consistently baked into our workflows. So I wanted to highlight it to the governance stream because, you know, I think it's important to kind of acknowledge, like, you know, these are the places where the community may interact with our content, or like this is our context around how we came to use certain tools to host our materials. But I think we have a decision to make that, especially as we try to say, okay, we're going to be more mature. We're going to have like, you know, a little bit more, you know, kind of time between major updates, and we're going to try to like manage this more from a volunteer aspect. The question around like persistence and storage should come into play. And so what I want to pose to the group is first a question of like, how many of you in the last 6 months have gone into the own cloud and interacted with, like, so not the YouTube, but like the actual own cloud, and like downloaded something, and like the behaviors around that? I see a hand up, Lorraine. Is that an affirmative or a question?
It's both. I actually use own cloud more than I use the YouTube playlist, just because if you're trying to get a particular piece of information, on the recording, you've got to go try to fast forward through the whole recording to find the right spot, where generally particularly for the presentation stuff we've been loading, own cloud is useful. The other related comment I have is one of the characteristics in terms of transparencies for an SDO is having a record of the work products and how we got there, and the discussions, and having that available and persistent over time. So I think persisting the material is really important.
Yeah. So when you think about like the behaviors around going to the own cloud, finding the materials, like potentially viewing them or downloading them, is there any downside to taking the materials that we have, because thank God InfoWay was able to claw them back from the recycling bin for us, basically. Because that would have been bad, and it's always challenging. But any downsides that we see to maybe moving towards a more like consistent storage in InfoCentral. So like in the past, like when we first kicked off 3 years ago, we kind of bumped back and forth around like, do we post to the HL7 Canada like document space or the FHIR implementers? But we've been using FHIR implementers for a lot of other discussions, forum posts, announcements. Like, is there any downside to posting there that folks like would see, or do we feel pretty confident in saying, let's at least put the things that we've done to date there so that there's a more persistent option moving forward?
Originally, the InfoCentral document storage was where I first looked before I realized things were on OwnCloud. Now, there might be in the longer term some benefit to us having our own forum on InfoCentral rather than just being under FHIR implementers. I don't know. And there may be a few things that should cross post HL7 Canada, but I think it's mostly the info. Definitely the profile stuff is mostly the implementers forum.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure about the governance content, but that's where we've been putting it for now. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, sorry, I keep jumping in there. I really strongly encourage that. I mean, as we go forward, Sheridan, with the governance structures, et cetera, and as we start taking a look at our roadmap issues as they arise, that this has to become a more distinct thread. So I think we need to find some way of doing that. I mean, it's right now it's related to the topics at hand, but it will expand as we are dealing with sustaining and maintaining and all these other things. So I think it might be a good idea to just separate.
Sorry. So I heard two things. One is persistence is really important. And then the second thing, Ron, when you said separate, so separate the profiling materials from the governance
From the
materials?
governance. Yeah.
Okay. So like if I was to then just action on that immediately, could I, because like FHIR implementers, we have a CA baseline folder. I mean, we could do it, we could make this CA baseline profiling folder. Like basically like I am hot to trot to make sure that there's a place for the profiling stuff to live that we have recorded, and then we can work through like, do we need a different folder or a different place for the rest of it? But I don't want us to lose anything.
No, I can't lose anything.
Okay.
But having it on InfoCentral is natural, so I think that's
I agree.
Exactly the details of that I think can be worked out, but getting it over to InfoCentral so we don't lose it. It's because that's where we look for documents for other groups and on InfoCentral. So
okay, so then what I will do is work with the admins to get, I might even have the ability to do it now. So at least get our kind of folder sorted and all of the content previously loaded into OwnCloud into its own folder here. We might have to, I think there's some older stuff that we had posted further down, like really early stuff, but we'll just make sure that it's like housed in a CA baseline folder and start circulating that link moving forward to folks. And I'm guessing we'll just like, how much time do you think people will need before we can say, okay, you're good to like shut down OwnCloud after we've made the port? Like, is 2 weeks enough time? That, I mean, if you're coming to a call, you'll have interacted and heard that we're switching over our link and can see an announcement on the forum. Do you think we'd need more time than that before we could tell Tarek that we ported everything over, you can close the OwnCloud down?
My gut feeling is that you can probably do it pretty quickly. Sure. I think the main thing is to have the content. So even if people go looking and that's been taken down, we can still, give them a sense of where to go. The main thing is to have it.
Okay. So we can have the OwnCloud link essentially dismissed. So if in the next day you need it, there's a link, but I guess, yeah, we don't want to become too reliant on this now that we know that we're going to have like a home for our content.
Yeah. Unless the presentations are available, we're not generally posting all of our presentations. The link in the presentations is ephemeral because if it's in the chat, it goes away when the call ends. And so unless it's sort of posted to the forum,
Yeah.
someplace, the link isn't easily retrievable again after a call.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'll make sure that when we do get everything ported over, I'll put so this would be like the folder link, right? On a forum post.
So right now I have a browser window open to OwnCloud that I go into every now and again. I suspect I might be the only one that's doing that. So I'm going to have to go and figure out getting this bookmark into my systems.
Yeah, and as soon as I mean, I can go ahead and do it now, or I can do it after the call and put the forum post out. But yeah, basically it'll just be getting in the behavior of using the new place. The nice thing about it too is that like what I will say is like in the past, people had been like, they'll email me a presentation and then I'll like remember 3 days later and put it in the own cloud. But like if it's in Info Central, if we have special presentations, if someone's speaking, they'll also probably be able to upload it to that folder as well. So there is, I think, some ongoing benefit there too. All right. Is there anything else that we want to make sure to talk about on this topic before we move on? It should be pretty cut and dry, but. All right. Now for the less cut and dry one. Okay. So folks are familiar with how the conversation about our canonical in the past. We know that it has to change given that when we first started working in the CA baseline, we made the mistake that some others have made at the same time around utilizing the HL7 canonical, like the HL7 international as part of our canonical. And because that we don't publish through HL7 international, we will have to, so that would be like I'll just pull up real quick for anyone who is still kind of new to the topic. So if I pull up our baseline guide, our profiles have effectively this as a canonical route. We've talked about pretty considerably switching over to an HL7 CA, like many folks publish their cores and their bases through their HL7 affiliate, and so they use their HL7 canonical base. Within the HL7 space, we don't have access to HL7.ca, which would be like maybe our first choice. We've had conversations with the folks that do have that domain. They seem open to it. But I wanted to pose this also from the perspective of like, shortly after that, I went out and for like $20 bought HL7canada.ca. If we wanted to utilize that because we want to move on this quickly, because maybe like it's going to take a lot of effort to make the switch over for everybody involved, like how do we make the decision about this one versus this one and the benefits of both, or the benefits of either? We know we have to change, basically. That's a no, and it's a question of what do we change?
That's a given. Having been on the call, Sheridan, around the HL7.ca issue, I don't think we have to be pure in following the pattern exactly. So HL7canada.ca we can hold, right?
Yep.
And I did not gain a sense of anything tangible we could engage with in terms of predictability about getting the other one. So I don't think there's any problem with doing the way you suggested.
Who makes the decision around HL7.ca? I don't know who owns that.
Well, that was our issue. It's owned by someone who was very originally part of participating in HL7 in the very, very early days, and sort of they stood it up notionally.
Oh, it's an individual, not.
Yeah, well, it's a belongs to a company actually that individual runs. So, so we had a conversation around what are the implications is, and the thing is they've got that threaded through some of their stuff. They've got a page that links out of it, and basically the feedback we got was they were not high on their list of concerns because they have a bunch of other very compelling stuff that they were trying to get done. So that sort of indefiniteness I was not very comfortable with. And
Yeah, it's unfortunate, because
Yeah.
one would hope that
Yeah.
HL7 Canada had HL7.ca.
Yeah.
It's not a huge amount of code change, but it is a change. And
Mhm,
I'd hate to actually ask the project to do it twice.
mhm.
I would suggest that if we go with HL7Canada.ca, I mean, yes, the CA domain should be obvious, but I don't mind the repetition there. I think it's actually really good. So
Yeah. No, I
my
don't.
personal feeling is once we make a decision, let's stick with it.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with whatever it is we decide. We just
Yeah.
need to decide and then not.
And not change it.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I'm in
So
agreement with it.
from the baseline perspective, well, so if I'm putting on my core hat and in one of the things that we had looked at specifically is like trying to impose the baseline to say like we're using the impose extension to point to the canonical URL of a baseline profile to say these rules and more. There are many of your other guides are one of the impacted parties. And so my goal would be that if we're going to be making the change that we would probably be making the change before we even get close to talking about like a more stable 1.0 core. So the earlier the better in my opinion, but I also know obviously Lorraine, like you've got pointers. I know some other folks have pointers and may want a little bit more time.
Well, yeah, it's like the team has said it's not a huge change, but it is a change and we need to sort of coordinate it with our other releases. And it's not just in our guides. I believe that there are some places within our software code that I'll have to change as well.
So
and this is totally separate from the discussion about confusion between baseline and core.
yeah.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much runway do you think we need? But like, let's say, because ultimately, so will this be this domain or will this be this domain is an HL7 Canada decision because it's ultimately like this is the domain that they have to utilize. But as a constituent that is impacted, we could say from a baseline perspective, we would like to have this escalated. So if from a baseline perspective, we have we need a month to get our ducks in a row before we start making these changes, or we need 2 weeks to look at our release schedules to know, like, do we need 2 months? Anything that we can determine now will help us like basically work back from it, right? Otherwise, it's always going to be nebulous. It's always going to be something we could do down the line, and we'll just keep pushing and pushing and pushing.
Well, if you publish a package with the new changes, that doesn't mean people have to go with the current package automatically. They can
True.
shift when they're ready, as long as both packages are available. Because we're never going to coordinate everybody's release schedules.
Yep.
That's impossible. I mean, I don't know what other people's release schedules are and things, but we just pushed out for the end of March, obviously, because of fiscal year end and things like that.
So should we try to target, this is like a development effort for the profiling stream to start undergoing like in the next month, 2 months?
I'd like to see the decision made before then. Whether the changes have to be applied before then is another thing.
So decision.
Yeah, I'd like to know where the decision is relatively soon.
Like sooner than a month?
Yeah.
2 weeks?
Well, before the HL7 meeting, maybe, just as take an arbitrary time frame.
Yeah, I was going to use that as an arbitrary metric as well, but I think that's a very good idea. Yeah.
All right, so that's on the profiles, the guides, and the software.
Mhm.
So we'll have a decision on, are we gonna push for this, or are we gonna go with, bird in the hand? And I'm sure we'll talk about that from HL7 Canada perspective and kind of
Well,
walk
and
through.
I think we also want to have it done before we try to ballot the baseline.
Yep. And that was something that I think we've heard time and time again, which is like, we do not want to keep pushing this forward and saying like exposure to more folks and then bring a change on them. That would be very frustrating.
Yeah, and I think Elliot was working on trying to clean up all of the warnings and things on our IG, and this relates to one of them.
Yeah. All right. Are there other pieces around the canonical URL that we want to make sure that we talk about, or that have to be considered as part of the decisioning of this or this and our timelines for change?
Yeah, so the one comment I have is that it's one thing for it to be a canonical reference, but it's also something searchable online. So will we have some kind of landing page for that domain?
Yeah, ideally it should be resolvable, is what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like I think I can gift the domain name to HL7 Canada, and then we'll just have to talk about, does HL7 Canada also want to pay for like web hosting of a web page? Because the
Yes,
domain name
correct.
itself doesn't give us the web page. We have to create one.
No, correct. That's exactly. But I think if people see it as a URL that looks like a normal URL, it would be nice just to be sure it resolves to something at
Yep.
its root, right? So I think we should talk with Infoway about that, actually, as the steward of HL7 Canada. And this will also allow then that other site who will do this, I think, without objection, to just redirect itself to that page, should people have interest. And then the thing is I've been wanting to have such a root page anyway for ages, to be able to do some things with it, particularly as we begin to promote balloting and stuff like that, which is really truly an HL7 Canada pursuit, needs to be branded a little bit more strongly that way. So this will help in that regard as well.
Perfect. I don't think there's any impact to our package. Like, what's it called? Our actual package ID, right? Like, we're still, I don't think even I don't think the domain URL and the package ID have to map up. So I think that we're covered there.
Yeah, that would be my expectation.
Yeah, because we want to have some consistency so that somebody could look across the versions.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So can we talk about the project URL? Which is I would say it's a less technical, but it falls in me to the same theme, which is, you might have a bookmark somewhere, or you might have put, for instance, I know BC has or had, probably still has, a link out to our FHIR project page in the their list of standards. So like our links to our FHIR project potentially could be out there in the world and impacted by our URL change of our project page. That being said, we've kind of held off on changing our project page as like the very last item as part of like our scrubs that we started undergoing over a year ago, to ensure that we were moving like core from the notions of the canonicals and from the guides and pages, and like we're being very, very clear on like there's a baseline and a core, and like the baseline is not both. The only thing that I can find that still trips people up, like I still get questions about it sometimes, is the project page URL, which right now is CA FHIR baseline profile CA core, right? But we were looking at even our like our guide build, we've moved away from using core in like how you actually interact with that content. Oh, hold on. Did I put that in the wrong place? I did. This is the one I'm trying to copy. So, I think that like,
So what's the canonical URL of the guide itself?
It is this second. It's our package. That's not what I want. I think, is it going to give my IG or my downloads? That the canonical URL of the guide uses this. I might have to actually go into my files to look at it if I can't get it in my downloads. Let's see. It's, I know for certain that it's distinct from the simplifier project URL.
Yeah, because this is something that I've been trying to educate on around naming systems. That the simplifier link isn't the naming system. The naming system is the canonical URL. I'm just sort of looking here, but so we may want to rename the project page in simplifier. One of the things I've seen, I know Ontario has done, because when I went searching for the e-referral e-consult Ontario guide, I got a link that I got out of Google, and then I had the reference at the top saying you're looking at an old version of the material. Click this link to get to the new one.
Yeah.
So we certainly could put something at the top of the old project page URL to say, you know, we're not using this anymore, go here.
Yeah, like archive it or do something like that. So yeah. So to answer your question, Lorraine, like our canonical for our implementation guide will also have to change, but it is not the simplifier one.
Yeah, so it's still the hl7.org/FHIR. Yeah. Yeah, no, it should never be the simplifier one. That's a publication mechanism.
So like, is anyone opposed to this, like, to this concept that like we shouldn't move on from, like, to have more clarity in what our simplifier, because we know, and like, to be honest, I go out there and I tell people, like, if you like, always start with the simplifier Canadian Fire Registry, right? Because like that's a really fast way of looking at people's profiles, making sure that we're posting, even though our guide, we're hosting it like as a CI build online, we put links there. I think there are going to be people who come in through simplifier instead of the CI build page. So is there anyone like who thinks, no, we should not be changing, and like as part of our cleanup activity, like whatever we end up, if it's CA Fire baseline profiles or Canadian Fire baseline, but at least removing core from the end. And then if we're in agreement that like we do need to clean it up and we want to have a project where we're reporting over all of our information with, you know, obviously the cleaned up canonicals now, what do we think we should use? Should it be Canadian Fire baseline and then remove the profiles? Like, this is our chance to like kind of get it right, as opposed to like what we kind of did, pulling ourselves up by the bootstrap 4 years ago, getting some things put together.
Well, we don't need the word Canadian in this part of the name if we're using HL7 Canada as the base part of the URL, right?
Well, I'm talking about for the simplifier one. So for the simplifier project page, once you start this one, you can't change it. So like, so the URL will have, absolutely. We don't have to repeat Canada in it because it will already have Canada in the URL for the canonical and for the implementation guide canonical. But for the project page, it would look something like this, because you can't change the URL for the project pages themselves. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we could be CA baseline, we could be CA Fire baseline, we could be CA Fire baseline profiles, which is what we are now.
Yeah, but it's more than just profiles, so that's probably. personally, CA baseline makes sense to me because FHIR seems to be redundant, but I'm not sure what others think.
Do we think that that would help, help in explain the sister relationship that we have with CA Core? Because like, we're not, like, it shows we're kind of more aligning in conventions, and like, they're not only not duplicating names, but also kind of trying to align in description.
Is core and simplifier?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Any preferences? I think, Lorraine, you said you don't have to repeat it. Is anyone worried about if we were to be CA baseline? I think it'd go either way, right? It either kind of makes folks say, oh, well, is it a base? Is it a core? Or it could say, I can see CA baseline, I can see CA core, they're right next to each other. I can see in the profiles how they call each other out and they talk about their relationships. And so like it feels more congruous. Buy a bunch, folks. What do we need to make this decision if we don't have what we need today?
Okay. I think, as Lorraine mentioned, yeah, we can drop the word to make more means readable or more clear, as we don't need to repeat the word. Just I'm just that is my understanding, as Lorraine mentioned. So could we help her? As in BC, we have our own local, we call BC core on our site.
So Mukesh, that kind of puts you more favoring CA baseline?
Correct.
Okay. Anyone not? So I've heard kind of 2 in favor of, well, I'm counting myself in that. So maybe 3 in favor of that. Anyone else want to propose a different consideration for the project page? So what we'll probably do is like, we'll say, this is what the governance stream is recommending. We'll bring it to our profiling stream for any folks that don't attend out governance, so that they're aware as well, because obviously the artifacts live under that page. And if folks are comfortable with it, then we'll start going through the motions of actually getting that project built out and the other one archived. But our goal from a governance perspective is to put forward like our front runner and then make sure the profiling stream is cool with that as well.
Yep.
Okay. And we will learn from our past mistakes and not put any versions in our project page URLs, because it's really hard to change that.
Yeah.
What about, so I heard Lorraine, you mentioned putting basically like not closing down the old URL entirely, but putting a note indicating the project has moved and maybe archiving it. I think that was something Joni's talked to us about in the past, is like, so that if we're not going to be making updates in this project, it doesn't stay like under the same, it's not collecting the same spot, keeping someone from having the same spot on the active projects as the part of the registry, because there's like a limitation on the number of active projects or something like that. Anyone opposed to that? Because we wouldn't be anticipating making any further updates on this project in particular. Can I make a request and have someone play devil's advocate against it for me? So like Lorraine, I have gone and like, I look at a lot of your guides, right? I look at like everybody's guides for part of my job. A lot of times what I'll do is like, I'll find something on Google and I'll look at the guide and I'll find out that, like I'll be looking in like the profile pages and then only realize later after looking at the profiles that it's no longer active. I'm wondering if we can save folks from the confusion by having a set of FHIR profiles that would be like stale dated forever from the time that we decide to archive this project. That would no longer be in alignment as we start to make changes in the new project space. Like, does it make sense for us to remove the profiles entirely from this project space as part of the port so that we're not like putting some other one out there that could create confusion down the line about what's like most recent?
Well, we have more granular status fields in Simplifier than we used to, correct?
Yes, we do.
And so we might want to consider as a transition, I don't know what the equivalent of deprecated is in Simplifier, but to make sure that, because I think that we've been, at least some of the material, not necessarily the baseline material, we've been somewhat remiss in not actually taking things through the stages, you know, draft and published and things. So there's a lot of stuff out there that's draft and isn't marked published, you know, etc. Even in, for instance, the Canadian URL registry. So I think we may want to actually think a little bit harder about effectively using the status fields on those artifacts in Simplifier.
So you're saying like one option rather than, because like so I had posed removing the artifacts from the this.
I guess the question I have is, does that affect our package at all?
I was just wondering that too.
Because that's what people are dependent on, is the package. Although there's some people may be doing direct links into Simplifier, I don't know.
I have to believe that there is a way to maintain your packaging history and your ID, because I know that sometimes projects get like moved. So like I've seen this with like NICTIS, they'll move projects that were like independent and then they'll bring them up into like a larger organizational stream. So I have to believe that like you don't lose all your history, but it's something that we'll have to put a question into FHIR if like, can we port over our package? Will we have all of our profile histories? Is it as simple as like basically like mirroring it and creating it in under a new project space? Because our profiles also have history too.
Yes, they do. But I'm assuming that this is actually different than the publication status of the implementation guide, which is different than the packaging status, right? So if you think, so if you think about the publication stack in one of the international guides, you've got the CI build, you may have snapshots for connectathons, then you may have balloted and you may publish one, and then you keep going with other versions, but the other versions are still usually accessible, depending upon what your need is.
And like one of the limitations that we have is that like from a guide perspective, we've only ever had a CI build. So we have a CI build and we have snapshots of and like packages. So we can see like at the profiles at this point in time, you could go back in history and see this is what they were. But we don't have a this is the branch that you would go to and to that point. Like if you go here, there's like a 404, right? Because we've never ever published anything other than a CI build guide.
Yes, and so once we're ready to say create a ballot version, that should be something that shows up in the directory of public versions, and then the final published one that's post ballot. you know, just as part of our getting our processes mature.
So tie things together when we host a ballot version in the, what is that called? Directory of published versions.
And how that ballot version ties to the status values that we're using in Simplifier.
I feel like we were gonna have to have some more conversations about, like, so we use IG Publisher as a means of convenience, because we had a lot more folks when we first started interacting with that content. All of our content is part of a GitHub, and it syncs up with our Simplifier project and our CI build. But I feel like we're gonna have to have a conversation about what happens when we do this, because this is automatically generated by the tooling. And like, I know from just from the like standpoint of struggling with the extensions packages recently, that like it's not as simple as just like populating a table and manually getting to say what goes into it and saying, here's how you find that package. So like if we do pursue this, and we're using the IG Publisher as a means of like putting out that guide, I feel like there's going to be some lift that we have to figure out for that.
Oh yeah, it won't be, you know, it won't be trivial. I don't think it's huge either, but it's someplace in between.
Yeah.
But having this kind of a build of the IG generated out of Simplifier is useful, because that makes us sort of consistent with how everybody else is doing their IGs.
Yeah, and I have to say, having gone through the process now a number of times, like the Simplifier versioning process, once we had it available and now can use it, is like much easier. So I know that HL7, obviously, like when you're building, like there's a lot of process and committees and like things that go into getting listed in this way. But when I think about the lift that like as a volunteer group of folks, it might make sense for us to consider like going back over to like getting all of our MD files ported over to Simplifier if it makes the versioning and the release a lot easier. I know, Ron, that probably makes the hair on your back of your neck stand up, but like from a technical author standpoint, I'm not super excited about figuring out this whole thing after living through it with the extensions registry pack.
Right.
Although I think that the value is worth the effort myself. I think they're two different things, of just like our packaged releases versus our formal publications are slightly different things. I think this list of formal published versions versus the individual status of the artifacts in Simplifier are different things too.
So agree there. So I guess what I'm unclear of, maybe I'll just show it to you guys real quick. So I'll show it to you with CA Core. So in Simplifier, we've basically been able to say, you know, well, we've got our packages, right? Those go out. And then we have like a table that, because there isn't like a replicated directory of versions that we have that's like super intuitive, we just make it in a table, and it's really easy to publish a version guide and then just have the link that has this, right? So Lorraine, are you saying like the juice is worth the squeeze on, I'll show you this real quick, on like trying to push through and figure out how to make this work within our link that we've been making from the build? Or as long as
I guess the question is how much squeeze is there, and I don't have a good sense for that.
Yeah.
However, getting to a point where our guides have that kind of list means that we're doing things the same way everybody else is doing them.
Yeah.
Which has a benefit, but again, depends upon the squeeze.
So I'll mark it as an outstanding discussion topic that like we have to like, so I think these are really quick and easy things to action, right? Which is like, regardless of big decisions that we have to make, we know our URL has to change. We know that means that we're going to have to put in some legwork on like getting everything sorted. And that there are bigger conversations then around like when we go to ballot, do we want to do it and create the guidance simplifier and use that for a versioning structure? Or when do we start assessing like what the lift is to try to get this published through the machine that is like affiliate processes for publishing? Maybe, Ron, that's something that you can bring up with International Council, is like, how do others
Yep.
take advantage of this if they're going to be publishing it like hl7canada.ca, so that this is easy, straightforward, and doesn't have to go to a bunch of HL7 committees.
Gotcha.
Which I think it does if you're publishing through HL7 International to get on this list.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll add it to our
All right,
potential
thank you.
topics for governance.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, actually, Ron, this is a good list for you to skim down because we put this together last week. But we thought that
Yeah, fantastic.
topics were.
Yeah, I missed that last week. Cool. All right. Sharon, I have a few other thoughts in terms of moving forward with some things, and I'm just putting an email together for you, but we don't need to talk about them here. We can chat about them offline, but it's just dotting I's and crossing T's. Okay, cool.
All right, so I've added that as a future topic. We will put in next Friday's session. Where is I? This is the proposed URL. Following the, like, if the profiling stream's comfortable with it. And it sounds like I'm not hearing anything that folks are really scared about from the governance perspective. We will start the process of like asking for the project space, making the announcements. Like, I'll probably do a little bit of the port like ahead of time and then make the announcement on the forums to make sure that folks are aware, just like everything else. And I don't think these two are tied, right? Like we can still port this over like before we update the canonicals.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have our work cut out for us, but I would rather have things that we can immediately action on, like we've got next steps that are tangible. So that's good. Is there anyone who wants to volunteer to reach out to FHIR and see if we can port over like basically all the contents, including the package?
Sheridan, you can actually change the project URL without creating a new one, so that would everything else would carry over.
Oh, does it? Okay, so let's talk. I'm not going to do it right on the like, but in this.
Yep. If you go to manage, top right corner.
Yep.
Go to project URL.
Oh my God, Ken, this would be amazing. Okay.
Way to go, Ken.
So we still like the pieces that are let's tell BC and anyone who points to as the URL is changing, but
correct.
So much easier.
No, you need to give them that notification, absolutely. And
okay.
And just see my note as well, Sheridan, in terms of the timing for some of these things, and that would be great. Okay. Thanks.
All right, that saves us a handful of steps, which is
fantastic.
great.
Yeah,
Can change URL. And then is there anyone, so I know we've got to talk to the folks who list the project page on the BC standards list. Is there anyone else that you know of that should be made aware of, like have the targeted engagement around the URL change? Like, so if someone posted on a web page, like I know from InfoWay standpoint, like we've also been knowing like, okay, if the canonicals change in the future for the baseline, like where have we pointed to those so that we know where to update them? But if you're like that, where you've pointed to the canonicals or you've pointed to the project page and simplifier, will you either speak now or send us an email so that we know who to like specially target if they don't catch it on the forum? All right. I'm hopeful that means that maybe there isn't a ton of places that
Yeah.
we'll see.
Oh. We'll see.
So that would actually mean that these things would not matter, which
Mhm.
okay. And then the retiring wouldn't have to occur.
Sweet.
Beautiful. All right, Ken, you just
That
need
is.
the weekend.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
Okay.
Only.
Anything else that we want to make sure to touch on in the last 2 minutes before we break? All right. So I will see many of you next Friday. We're gonna reconvene. We'll have this as a housekeeping item to make sure folks are comfortable. Everybody on both ends has kind of been considered for this. And then next Friday, which will be a profiling stream call, we're gonna jump right into any of the outstanding community issue items. So that's going to be, I think we had one that came in through February around diagnostic report, as well as some of the QA that Elliot has been doing and highlighting for prep for ballot. So we're going to go dig into the profiles and the JSON. See you a week from now to do that.
All right.
All right. Thanks, folks.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Right.